Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Conor Sweeney, a writer, director, producer, and actor whose various projects include Father's Day, The Editor, Psycho Goreman, and Divorced Dad. He's also turned up in the VHS and ABCs of Death series, and he stars in his pal Steven Kostanski's new comedy Frankie Freako, which opens across Canada this Friday, October 4th, and is the most deliberate throwback to a specific kind of 80s genre cinema you will ever see. You should check it out. Conor chose Alien, Ridley Scott's genre-defining work of spacebound horror that pits the crew of a freighter against the perfect killing machine from which there is literally no escape, and, in the process, turned Sigourney Weaver into a legitimate movie star and launched a franchise that's been running for 45 years. Honestly, I think it's a perfect film, and you may not be surprised to learn Conor agrees. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, it was very hard to choose. My picks were Blue Velvet, Alien, and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which are a kind of psychotic collection of movies. But Alien, I feel like the making of is so much more interesting than both of those, even though they have their cool stories of their own. But as like a kid in a small town, I'm from a town of 2,000 people, and I was different and kind of weird and loved science fiction. And I was a really big Star Wars kid. So like I was coming of age. I was a kid when like Kenner first started releasing the Power of the Force toys in like 95,
Okay.
8. And because of that, I think it was all like a lead up to the special editions, but I became a really, really, really big Star Wars fan. And at the same time-ish as the special editions came out, that was around when Alien Resurrection came out, right? And there was something so fascinating about the look of that alien. There is truly a magic about that xenomorph that you just can't put a finger on, right? That isn't, God, it's a 60-70% of the success of that first movie is just that magical creature. And so I saw Alien Resurrection. I loved it. I watched it recently, and it's a very strange movie. But I really loved Alien Resurrection. It came at the perfect time in my life. And my dad said, like, you've got to watch Alien if you're watching Alien Resurrection, because it's incredible. So I watched Alien, the first one, and yeah, as like a counterpoint to it's so the opposite of Star Wars. Like from the very first moment, it's and I loved Star Wars, I loved Alien when I saw it, but it is the opposite in every way. It opens Star Wars opens bombastically with that great music and a space fight, and space looks exciting and incredible, and it's got big flashy ships. And Alien opens with like that droning, scary, sad, sounds like it's underwater almost, the music. There's barely music at all. And where Star Wars had this big planet looming underneath of you and bright, Alien starts slowly panning across this disgusting brown planet, slowly going past. It has this brown gas around it, and the title, instead of punching you in the face, it slowly materializes like hieroglyphics up on the top of the screen. And then the only spaceship you see is that big refinery drifting through space. There's no opening crawl. It just tells you Nostromo hauling a refinery. It gives you the very basic information that you need for this movie. And just as like a counterpoint to Star Wars, it's so cool because it feels almost intentionally doing the opposite in every way of Star Wars. And just at those moments, I knew I was in for something so different from the science fiction that I had watched up to that point. And then the whole movie, yeah, just the atmosphere of it was so unlike anything I had seen before, and it really, I loved it so much from that moment on.
I'm like Ripley at this point. Like, it's been in my life so long I can't remember a time when it didn't exist. I was 11 when it came out. Or no, I was still 10. I was 10 when it came out in 79. I obviously was way too young to see it. I read the heavy metal comic novelization, which at the time was this bizarre transgressive thing. I still don't know how I got my hands on it. It was basically like a large format graphic novel, effectively. Weirdly faithful in likenesses and design and conveying the intensity more than the gore, but it was almost like reading the storyboards. It was an incredibly compelling reading for a 10-year-old. Then I read the novelization by Alan Dean Foster on a bus. I remember vividly finishing it on the bus home because I had a long ride from school. And it was a nightmarish quality because Foster he injected certain things like what the process of hypersleep feels like that it's not in the film, but it is. Like the little things about, I think he must have seen the storyboards or even early footage of Kane waking up at the very beginning of the film and just deciding, oh, well, that's a dreamless sleep and your body doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And he just extrapolated this really unnerving introduction. And then on top of all of that, the movie was out there in TV spots that were incredibly disturbing to a 10-year-old. I don't know if you've seen them. They're on the DVDs.
That sound effect that plays throughout.
That kind of a hollow wind noise.
And it's like a scream. Sounds like a scream and an alarm. They've been using it in like trailers since then, the Alien trailers. And that sound is so strange.
Yeah, I always wondered if they stole that from the opening of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it
sounds like that.
Yeah, they altered the photo flash into something else. But there was an ad for it based on what looked like a close scan of the model they came up with for the poster, the grid thing, this weird plasticine looking grid on television, and it was just the most unnerving thing to stumble across as a 10-year-old. And you're watching television, it's late at night, something weird is on the TV and you can't parse it. And so by the time I finally saw the film, it panned and scanned, in a horrible VHS version that was the only way to see it at the time. When I was old enough, I was sort of filling in the blanks of the missing half of the frame, and it was exquisite. And then when I finally saw it in scope and subsequently in theaters, and oh my God, it's only in retrospect do I realize just how transformative it was, because when you're a kid, you just think every movie is like this, right? Yeah. Like this is what an R-rated movie feels like, but it's not. It's just so incredibly elegantly aggressive at what it does. I'd never seen anything like it.
I was going to say the same thing. Is I saw it on VHS. DVD was just coming out and it was prohibitively expensive. We didn't have it. So I was watching it on VHS. And with a lot of movies, I've thought this, you don't realize because widescreen didn't exist. So you don't know what you're missing. But Alien's anamorphic. So there is so much that you're missing. It's so beautifully shot. And I was thinking with Halloween too. Halloween is anamorphic and it's gorgeous. And there's so much. The experience is totally different watching it on VHS. You would never know how nicely shot these movies are. But they're so good. And there is something so deep in them that the quality comes through still. And there is, with horror movies, there's like a scariness added with VHS where it's grimier. And Alien, there was stuff that, like when they find the space jockey, it was on such a small screen and it was so cropped you couldn't see the ship around him that I remember straining my eyes and being like, what is that even? Is it the skeleton of an alien? Is it just rocks that are kind of shaped like an alien? Because Giger did so much in that ship that looks like it could be other things, like sexual shapes and human and mechanical and animal, that on a VHS, it adds so much mystery to it.
Yeah.
And that's the key to Alien that has been lost, like at the fault of Ridley Scott, honestly, is the mystery is so important to that movie and is so it adds so much to the scariness, because as much as these astronauts do, which is absolutely nothing. They find this ship, it could be thousands of years this thing's been sitting there. Why does it have eggs in it? You don't ever find out. Was this cargo on this ship, or was it an alien, was it this species that was hauling their own kind? You never know. And when you lose that mystery, you lose everything that made that movie cool.
Yeah, I don't fully understand Ridley Scott's conviction that those are the unanswered questions from that film, right? Like the point is that it's, and Stephen King wrote about this far more eloquently than I ever will, but it's the Lovecraftian horror. It's the sense that you have stumbled into a larger universe and you have, first of all, no control and then no comprehension. And you're exactly right about the VHS effect. Watching it in 4:3 makes some of it incomprehensible. You can't figure out how Dallas is navigating the air shafts, and that incredible reveal, which is beautifully orchestrated in scope, doesn't make sense. It's still terrifying, but it isn't until you see it in scope that you understand exactly how confident that section of the film is in its storytelling. And the space jockey, you lose all those mats and the sounds. You lose scale, you lose scope, literally. And adrift in it is a couple of puny humans in any given moment, because thanks to the cropping, they're even smaller, right? Because the frame dwarfs them in a different way when it's 4:3.
And a movie that's like all about part of the great effect of the movie is the claustrophobia that it creates.
Mm-hmm.
And 4:3 really adds to that, because they're stuck in that little box. And obviously my preferred way of, I did watch it in 4:3 recently, because I collect VHS rips of movies.
Oh yeah.
Fun to watch the different, to see it in a different light. And it's pretty dismal watching Alien that way. But yeah, I kind of like how much more claustrophobic it feels in that format. But yeah, Ridley Scott, it's interesting to try to see who is responsible for what makes Alien great, because it's such a confluence of chance events that made it into a successful movie. Like Dan O'Bannon obviously has a lot to do with it. He brought in Mobius, who he met on, I think that Yorodowski's Dune failure obviously like had a lot to do with it. Dan O'Bannon met Giger, he met Mobius, and was able to, once he started writing Alien, he was able to bring the two of them in. And have you read Dan O'Bannon's script for Alien?
The Eighth Passenger.
What then David Giler and Walter Hill changed.
I've read. I think I've read I haven't read the screenplay, but I read the treatment.
Okay.
The first pass, which was just text version of it with no dialogue, and the spine of it is interesting because it's almost completely there.
Yeah.
And then they did. I think Hill and Giler simultaneously simplified and expanded it with the choices they made, and it's this fascinating push and pull between everybody's creative vision, because Walter Hill just wants to simplify, and David Giler clearly, I think, like Ash was the idea that you have to personify Mother's malevolence, that it can't just be the ship, there has to be something else physically responsible.
Yeah. I think Dan O'Bannon, because I have read his screenplay, and it's pretty terrible, honestly. The bones are all there, and they're genius. The idea of a parasite gestating inside of you and ripping out it was going to be a mind-blowing scene, no matter who directed the movie. And you can't understate how important that was. And basically the idea of hearing a SOS that turns out to be a warning, landing on the planet, finding a derelict, bringing back the alien, all of that was Dan O'Bannon's. But the dialogue is so terrible, and it's very dark. I love Dark Star, but it's way more Dark Star than it is Alien. And I think David Giler and Walter Hill really saved the movie. They created the characters that we now know. There was no Ripley, there was no Ash, and all of the like improvisational, their script lent itself way more to the improvisation that made Alien so real and so cool. And Dan O'Bannon ended up suing them to get the rights, like to get full credit for the screenplay, because they wanted screenplay and to give him story by, which is, I think, how it should have been credited, because it really is their script, what's on the screen. And Dan O'Bannon's, I love him, but he was a nutcase if you watch him in interviews. He's crazy. And he just like hounded them until he finally was able to arbitrate and get the full screenplay credit. But it's stuff like that. There's so many different things that happen to fall into place to make this movie, because it could have easily turned into, like, O'Bannon wanted to bring it to Roger Corman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you read the script, and it so easily could have been any of the Alien like it could have been Inseminoid or Forbidden World or Extro or Galaxy of Terror, which James Cameron was the production designer on, interestingly. But getting Giger and getting Ridley Scott, I think, leveled the movie up into the masterpiece that it became. But it so easily could have just been another B movie.
Yeah, really, every one of those films you mentioned is desperately trying to do something that Alien does effortlessly.
Yeah.
And they all play up the sexuality in a way that Alien itself, that like, Scott's not interested in any of that stuff. He's perfectly happy for it to be just subliminal in the design and upsetting in a way that we don't fully get to deal with in the course of the film, right? Like the John Harkness wrote this beautiful review of Alien 3 way back when, where he just kept hammering home that the idea is that all slasher films are about the violation of the body, but Alien is the only one, or the Alien franchise by that point is the only one that really understands the pregnancy aspect of it, where something is being forced on a character.
Yeah.
And even if nobody gets chest bursted in the course of a movie, we all know what it means to just be in a room with a face hugger. And clearly that's what Romulus plays up with by just foregrounding that in the posters. And the face hugger scene in Aliens is probably the best thing James Cameron ever wrote. It's just so efficient and merciless. But this was our introduction to it. Like, this is the film where all of it happens. None of it is externalized or elaborated upon, except for one little muttered line from Ian Holm where he just says Kane's son in reference to the size of the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just there, and it's so oppressive and so unnerving. And the choice not to lean into that is everything.
Yeah. It's like we were saying about the mystery of it. It's such a movie that gets under your skin. So much of it is Giger's design that is so sexual in a way that's like very hard to articulate. Like, the head is a big penis. When you see the original design in Necronomicon that turned into the xenomorph, that is straight up a penis on its head, which they obviously toned down in Alien, but it's still there. It still has that effect on you where you can't really articulate. It's like, it's a sexual creature. It's born out of rape. And then even the ship, the derelict, is very sexual. It's got those vaginal openings that you enter into the ship, and it's never stated. In Galaxy of Terror is a good example of what to do it wrong. The alien rapes a woman, like actually rapes her, unlike the face hugger, where it's done in a very different way. It's done in a parasitic way.
Right. And well, you don't get to see the workings of the facehugger, right? Like, it's deliberately held back from us because of the design of the creature.
Yeah. And that mystery, you said you've seen Romulus, right?
I actually haven't yet. I just got the announcement. I was supposed to go in August, and it got just sideswiped by a bunch of TIFF stuff, so I couldn't ever find time to go see it. You've seen it though, I see.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but I thought 2/3 of it was great. and then it introduces something that I think was Ridley Scott uh, under his encouragement, and it poisoned the whole movie for me. It uh, it's like it's a Prometheus element,
Yeah,
and
I've heard what it is. You could, I
you
mean, if you
have,
we don't have to spoil it, but I have heard about it, and it does sound
and
like a really stupid idea.
I hate that movie so much. That and Covenant. Something happened to Ridley Scott, although he had these bad instincts even back then, because there was an interview with him right after Alien where he said, "I want to do a sequel." This is pre-Aliens, where he said, "I want to do a sequel that explores where the space jockey came from." And it makes you want to pull your hair out when you hear this, because like I said, that the mystery is a golden egg, and to then indulge in where it came from, uh, the whole magic of that creature disappears. The whole well is poison. So when he went in there, I just don't consider that movie canon, because to do it in such a convoluted way, like the black goo is creates the xenomorph somehow, and I don't know, his instincts. It's And I love old Ridley Scott. I love Blade Runner. I love Alien, but there were some bad instincts that he either fought on Alien or just wasn't able to indulge in at that time. But that movie sure turned out so much better than Prometheus and Covenant. I just don't know how the same man made both those movies.
Yeah, I remember being like physically angry at the end of Prometheus, and
Yeah,
just that seeing it at the press screening and just frothing about how unnecessary it was and how weirdly, yeah, it's weirdly smug about a lot of things. That these are the most important things you need to know, and it's like they really aren't. They're
yeah,
really not that important. And then there's the other problem, of course, where the Star Trek reboot always has to struggle with it too, where the technology that we have now
yeah,
is too good for the movie that you make in 1979, and you have to find a way to reverse engineer it. And they really didn't. They didn't even bother. And I
yeah,
like the idea that the Nostromo is an older model. It's like just a crappy old ship because that's all it's good for. It's a tugboat. And the dirty future, which also does show up in Star Wars. I think that's the one thing that they did take from Star Wars, is that you can make a future that isn't glistening and clean.
yeah,
It's so great in Alien, and in Aliens even to a lesser extent, just because it's mostly industrial in its design. You can carry forward the idea that the future is boring, that, spaceships are just around now and it's no big thing. And then Prometheus has to make everything look like the inside of an iPhone, and it's all gleaming and beautiful and holographic. And it's the characters who act like idiots rather than the machinery, which I get it. I understand that's what he's trying to do, but he misses the larger point of any prequel, which is, even if these characters don't know what's going to happen, we do. So you have to make it interesting for the audience,
yeah.
not for the characters.
And the argument that it's like a higher grade ship, to me, it just doesn't add up, because the technology is just so vastly different. And Prometheus takes place before Alien,
Yeah.
so it really doesn't add up. It's what I liked in Romulus, that it is clunky CRT technology and stuff like that. But and just like the cast is so Hollywood, beautiful people in Prometheus, and they're so real in Alien. And uh, like when I was a kid watching Alien, the atmosphere is so gross for that whole movie.
Yeah.
Like it feels diseased. The whole movie, for a movie about sickness and parasites and disease, he was so good at making the movie just feel gross. And the characters all, because they just came out of hypersleep, they're all kind of, it feels like they're coming out of a sick, like a cold, like they just had a bad cold and they're coming out of it. They all talk really quietly. It reminded me of when my grandpa was in the hospital sick, and everybody talked in like quiet, hushed tones. That's kind of how everybody talks in Alien. They all kind of mumble and mutter and speak quietly, and it just felt so real. And everybody looked real. Harry Dean Stanton looks like a guy you'd see at a gas station,
Yeah.
and uh, that, because I couldn't articulate that as a kid, but I knew that when I was watching it, it felt unpleasant. The whole thing, even before the alien shows up, it just has an unpleasant vibe to it. And that's definitely in none of the sequels. Maybe Alien 3. Alien 3 is pretty oppressive. Um, but that I think is like really the great thing in Alien to me is that horrible atmosphere that it's got, where you just know something disgusting and bad is going to happen to these people.
Yeah, I always forget the rhythms of it. Every time I watch it, it's like I'm experiencing the midsection for the first time. The hunt for what they think is the chest burster, for this little thing that's running around, and the jump scare with the cat. I vaguely remember where that's going to happen, but then there's that scene where Brett wanders into the machine room, and just it goes on and on and on, and it's so amorphous.
Yeah.
And yeah, that moment where he sticks his head under the water, and you just realize just how gross and hot this space is.
Yeah.
And that there's nowhere to go. There's no outside. They're all trapped and the air is recycled, obviously, and they're miserable before the threat comes in. And then to just keep reminding us how dark and grim and cluttered this place is. There's no cleanliness. There's no shiny. I mean, there's the sleep room that's basically at the hibernation chambers, look pretty nice. Everything else is covered in oil and grease and dirt.
And like everybody's sick of each other, you can tell. Like they none of them want to be on a ship with each other. They all none of them seem to enjoy being around any of the other people. Parker and Brett kind of have a friendship.
Yeah, because it's a united front, because they're the labor class.
Yeah. Him searching around for the alien in the room that's full of chains and the water, that the most, because Ridley Scott said he wanted to make the haunted house movie in space. Mm-hmm. That is like the most, even like the cat jumping out it's so explicitly, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre also was like his big inspiration for that movie. That, like, them disappearing into different parts of the ship and getting knocked off. It's so funny. Once you know that Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired him in a big way with that movie, you can really see it everywhere.
Yeah, it is such a simple, and I think that you'd said that Halloween and Alien work really well in 4x3. It's because the simplicity of the story, I think, pulls us along even when the images are cropped. There is a really clearly defined threat. We're aware of it before most of the characters are. And there is nothing to do but watch it work. Like we're just pulled along in this incredible momentum. And Texas Chainsaw, weirdly, is the mirror image, right? Because if you don't go in the house, you're fine.
Yeah.
And they keep going in the house.
That's when I think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when I was watching it recently, I was like, they kind of fuck up. Like it's their property that they're going into. Obviously, you shouldn't beat them on the head with a sledgehammer.
Sure.
But they keep entering somebody else's property and facing the consequences. I guess Sally and Franklin don't. They get killed trying to go to the property, or Franklin does. But and I guess it's the same with this. If they hadn't gone to the planet and they hadn't gone into the eggs and they hadn't messed with the eggs, the alien really is just living its life cycle. You know, it's living on instinct. So it's not truly a villain in that sense, I guess, you know, as an animal.
Yeah. You get to appreciate what Ash says. I mean, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
It is a perfect organism, and it's our fault for touching and poking it.
That Weyland-Yutani as a corporation, the more that series went on, the more ridiculous that just as an idea, that corporation, the more times that they have tried to secure that alien and the more loss that they have suffered, whether it's like across 7 movies at this point.
Yeah, I don't count 7. The Alien v Predators, but yeah, there's a lot by now.
Yeah, so there's Alien, there's 4 of the original, then there's the 2 Prometheus, movies, then there's this.
Okay, Romulus. God, that's right. That's plus the Alien Predators. That's 9?
And
Jesus
then
Christ.
there's the Alien Isolation game, I think is canon.
Oh, yeah.
But the amount of stuff that Weyland-Yutani has lost, trillions and trillions of dollars, all they try to do is secure, and the TV show is Weyland-Yutani too that's coming out. It's so ridiculous to think that this company is so obsessed with one specific species of creature that they're willing over generations to try to secure it and lose space stations and colonies and refineries. It's so there's such a dumb idea at this point.
Yeah. But I think we also have the excuse, or not the excuse, but we have the explanation in universe through people like Burke, right? In Aliens. They can always blame human error. So they'll keep trying. There is a perfect solution. They just haven't got the right. It's the way every, Republican administration fails, and then the conservatives abandon, like, oh, George W. Bush wasn't a real conservative. He was just faking. And when Trump flames out, that's what they'll say about him. He was just the guy they believed in fervently for 8 years. And now it's the same situation with Weyland-Yutani. Of course they're going to keep throwing good money after bad. Have you seen what this thing can do? It kills everything. They want one.
Yeah, like what do you think their plan is ultimately? To drop it on warring countries?
You could probably use it to clear out a planet if people didn't want to leave. Like there's got to be some kind of locust metaphor that they're using. It's the bioweapons division that they tease. I don't think we've ever seen, and I assume that's what the Noah Hawley show is going to be about. They just the average working life of 17 people in a lab facility somewhere who just keep getting killed, and then new people show up every year, like in Fargo. It's just not, nope, new team. It's fine. They'll get it this time.
Well, there's just an outbreak there, and they
over and over again.
Yeah. I don't know where you could go with an Alien TV show, but I'm very curious.
Yeah, I was against it, and now I'm kind of intrigued in spite of myself, because the premise as laid out in that first film is so elegant and so beautiful. And the fact that 4 different film teams came up with 4 different executions of it, and they're all really interesting in their own individual ways. I'm weirdly fond of Alien Resurrection because it is such a bizarre attempt to staple gun Jean-Pierre Junet's vision. I talked to him about it when he came back to Toronto with Micmacs years later, and he said, they let me make the movie I wanted to make, and it was weird and messy and pretty. It's like, that is fair. That is exactly true.
It's those first 4 movies they're cool because they're so different, and they burn down the previous movie and they do their own thing, especially Alien 3, which very in a way that I love, very disrespectfully wipes the slate clean of you loved these characters, they're gone within the opening credits. They're with not in a fun, exciting way. They're gone in a really sad, ugly, they're just disposed of. And then Alien Resurrection does a similar thing, and it's so its own movie. And it's sad now to see, because Romulus, like I said, I liked a lot of it, but it goes the Disney route of paying so much tribute to the movies that came before it, straight down to reciting lines from the original.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's not necessary.
It's such a bummer to see, and it's what all movies do now. And I just loved how different and how unique each of those, whether you like them or not, how unique each sequel was, while still carrying on the main storyline. Not rebooting, which is what everybody does now, but carrying on, but still doing their own thing entirely. And Romulus definitely does not do that. Romulus is very, very referential to the old stuff.
Right.
Even Alien Resurrection, crazily.
Really? Because it takes place between the first 2, I thought.
Yeah, it does. But there's a part at the end that's straight out of Resurrection. But I won't go into that right now. I really like all 4 of those movies, that original series, for totally different reasons.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Via Vision's lovely new box set of Smoke and Blue in the Face, and launched my new advisory column for paid subscribers. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I think I may have told this story on the podcast before, so I apologize if I have. But I actually saw Alien Resurrection with James Cameron. I didn't know he was there. It was the press screening at the York one. It was in '70. It was this gorgeous experience, and I stick around for the credits. Maybe it was '97 actually, because he would have been here for the Titanic press tour.
Right.
And he'd clearly just asked if he could come.
Yeah.
And he and I were the only two people who were in the theater when the final credit rolled and the lights came up, because of course James Cameron stays behind and watches all the credits.
Yeah.
To see if there's anybody he wants to work with. And I just noticed it was him, and we'd met once before in passing, and I just said, "Oh, hi." And he said, "Hey." And I just said, "What'd you think?" And all he said was, "Not what I would have done."
That's very diplomatic of him.
Yeah. I didn't get the sense he disapproved, though. I think I got the feeling he was responding to this completely alternate vision that isn't his thing, and he had to sort of immediately stake that space out. But that I think he liked it. I think he enjoyed some of it. Maybe not the CG aliens, but I think he liked the weird funhouse feel of it.
It is so different from the other ones that I imagine, because he did such a different thing with Aliens that he probably appreciates somebody doing something that's totally different from the previous three as well.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, yeah, we can touch on the other films, but I think he was right with Aliens. The only way to make a sequel to a film as unique as Alien is to just go in a completely different direction, keep the essential aspects, but also make a different movie. Like, just completely change the game.
Yeah.
And now it's hard to imagine it was only 7 years later. Like, it was so recent in the larger timeline that he did this, that the audacity of doing that and doing it on a budget with virtually no money. I think the whole thing cost $18 million in '86, and
yeah,
only 6 alien suits, right? Famously, he just had to keep reshooting the angles.
Yeah. I think that probably the shot where they're all in the vents, they're all at use, I'm guessing, at that point.
The crawling shot when they're coming at the camera. I think that's the only time you see all the suits.
I love David Giler's outline that he wrote for Aliens before James Cameron ever came on. And he had the idea to have the Marines, I think, land on LV-426. And he had like a first block of like Ripley meets up with the Marines, they land on the planet, and then he just ends it with, and then other bullshit happens. Which I guess was James Cameron's place to come in and fill out all the bullshit.
He's good at that.
Yeah.
He found ways to do it. And the through line of Ripley's story, it's perfectly, it's totally fine to add a daughter we didn't know about. It's relevant, and it isn't relevant in Alien. It's great. Honestly, I think it's great that Sigourney Weaver plays the most pissed off character and is the one who is, like, there's that whole thing about, if they just listened to her, none of this would have happened. But it's true. She was right. She's doing what a warrant officer should do, which is stand there and question everything and make sure, don't let the thing in. You don't know what it is. You don't know. And Dallas isn't wrong either. His friend is dying, and that's all that he knows.
And also, he would personally die if Ripley didn't open those doors.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think what would have happened if everybody had listened to Ripley. I guess the alien would have been born and just lived on the planet.
Just be wandering around on the planet.
Yeah, just for the rest of its life, bored on a planet. Yeah, it's also, I like that it's, while there's so much sexual overtone to the movie with Giger's, it's a totally sexless ship. And they originally wrote it that Dallas and Ripley would have sex. And I think it's really smart to take that out and have it. The only sex in the movie is horrible, and it's non-consensual. It's interspecies, and it results in death ultimately. And then there's this kind of sexual thing wandering the ship, and it kind of treats you sexually. It's curious about Ripley when she's naked at the end. It when it's standing face to face with Lambert, and it's very curious about her, and it puts its tail between her legs, and you don't know what happened. It cuts away, and it sounds like something awful is happening to her, and you don't know what. But when it shows her legs dangling, they're bare legs, so her pants were ripped off. Who knows what happened to her? Uh, I love that. I love that as for a movie that's that sexual, there's no sex, and it's all implication and it's all metaphorical.
Yeah, we're soaking in it. That makes it worse.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was only in the novelization and the comic book, because those were my first exposures, and added in the, is it in the director's, the quote unquote director's cut that came out in 2003, when Ripley asked Lambert if she'd ever slept with Ash? Is that in the film? That's in the film, right?
I don't know if it's in the film. It's definitely in the script. Because yeah, there was an idea that they all were kind of having sex with each other.
Right. There's nothing else to do.
Yeah, nobody had sex with Ash. And in really early versions, I don't even know if it was in script form, but it was definitely discussed, where there's no real gay or straight in the future, which is very like a progressive thing for 1977, 78. And the men also had sex with each other. Like everybody was having sex on the ship. So that is very interesting. And yeah, that all of the sexuality was totally removed. But yeah, it was funny that the way that they were able to kind of figure out that something was wrong with Ash is that he wasn't wanting to have sex with them.
Yeah. It's the weird additions and subtractions of a director's cut that have gotten inside my head. I've watched the director's cut twice. I still don't think it's necessary. It does, again, with Scott, right? Like he did it to restore the cocoon scene, which isn't necessary. It's disturbing as hell, absolutely. And I think in 1979, it would have been too much for an audience. It would have been too horrifying.
Yeah, and even he admitted, like, he doesn't really dig the cocoon scene, and he doesn't consider it the movie a director's cut. So ultimately, it's like, oh, if you don't consider it a director's cut, what was the point in just re-release Alien? That scene is such a weird, abrupt roadblock for the pace that movie is moving at the end, with Ripley running around the ship through all of the smoke and the flashing lights, to then have her go and have that scene with Dallas. It's the pace that the movie's moving at is so disrupted by that scene. And the scene, so it's interesting to see it as like an Alien completist. So to have seen it back then was kind of cool, but I don't get it. It's funny too, like her running around with that flamethrower. That was a real flamethrower. That she was climbing ladders with it. Tom Skerritt was climbing through the vents with it. That thing could fire. They said there was a couple of times where they thought Ridley Scott had said to pull the trigger, and they almost did, but were stopped at the last minute, and they would have torched the whole crew. It's so nuts to think that they were actually. And when you watch Tom Skerritt climbing around in the vents with it, like the flames are so close to him. It's stuff you would never see.
Yeah, and again, because I was a kid, I just took it for granted that it was, none of this is real. Yeah. Now, of course, you just do it digitally, but no, those are real. What was the fuel air bomb they accidentally built while shooting the mothership scenes in Close Encounters? Douglas Trumbull said they'd filled this entire studio in Marin County with oil smoke because they wanted to they wanted to create the effect of the ship descending through pollution.
Oh, interesting.
And the ship's lights were all tiny incandescent, like Christmas tree lights.
Yeah.
And someone said, like, if there's a single spark, we lose Marin County. We blow up this entire area. And they had just built this bomb without even thinking about it. And then they immediately had to vent it and make it safe. But there's 2 shots. They only got 2 shots, and they're both in the film.
Wow. I love that carelessness that they used to use to make movies. Like the stories making Apocalypse Now and everything too. People in real danger, which I guess ultimately eventually led to
Actual deaths. Yeah,
yeah, the Twilight Zone. And then
I was thinking that too.
after something like that, obviously it's great that stuff became safer, but there's like a intangible, palpable danger and excitement in all those movies before that losing is a real lost cinema.
It's weird, right? Like I think you can see the tension in bodies. I think that's
Yeah.
where it comes across in like veins on necks and people just sweating a little more. And it is the thing that's lost in that jump cut without the cocoon scene, because the next time we see Ripley is after she will have just seen it and experienced that scene when she comes out from the top of the like when she enters up into the
Yeah, the
floor.
tight
Yeah,
clothes of her.
and she looks sick. Like she
Yeah.
looks horrified, and that doesn't quite make sense in the theatrical cut. Although it works perfectly because, of course, she would be like she's still running from an alien and terrified. But
Well, there's stuff in that movie that it's crazy. There's lots of stuff they were making up on the spot. Like Ridley Scott would the scene where the tail comes between Lambert's legs, that's Brett's legs that they used. And so he was shooting these things not knowing how they're going to cut together. Like how are we going to make it that Lambert died without showing that Lambert died, or Parker? And there was a scene with um that they shot half of, and it's crazy that they did this without knowing that they didn't have the budget to do it, but they were going to try to fire the alien out of the airlock, and something goes wrong and they get stuck in this room with no air, and Ripley and Parker are trapped in there and they almost die, and the alien escapes, and then Ripley goes to talk to Mother, and that's why her nose is bleeding at that part, is because she was in this room with no oxygen. And in the final movie, her nose is bleeding, and it feels like it's a disturbing scene seeing her because she's crying and her nose is bleeding, and you don't really know why, but it feels like maybe it's stress or like the situation has gotten to her so much that she's having these involuntary physical reactions, like bleeding from the nose and crying, and it makes it scarier. It worked, but I definitely remember watching it as a kid, not understanding why her nose was bleeding, and it's because they excised this scene because they shot half of it, and then we're like, oh, we don't have the money to do this. We should have maybe looked into this before starting to film this sequence and filming scenes that kind of require that scene between them.
well, the graphic novel has some very different ways of Lambert and Parker dying, and I think it's the original version or the version that they were working with at the time. With enough lead time, they hadn't solved the problem yet. They came up with something else, and it's messier and weirder. And there's a pool of blood that can't be explained. And
Yeah.
I can remember that image very, very clearly from when I was 10, thinking I shouldn't be reading this. There's something wrong about this.
And like Lambert is dangling, it's her feet are like dangling, and you're wondering what is happening in the top half because you can't see why she's hanging like that.
Yeah, it's the
It's
one
again,
time the
it's all
film
the
just
mystery.
refuses to show you something, right? Other
Yeah.
than the alien itself.
The mystery. That's all it all comes back to. That's what's so cool. It's what makes that movie magic is the mystery element that Prometheus totally flushes down the toilet.
Yeah, and they ruined they didn't ruin the xenomorph. The xenomorph is perfectly fine the way it is, but the improvements that they inflict on the design are never satisfying. And
No,
when they finally show up in Covenant, they're weightless because they're digital, and there's just no sense of a person in a suit or even any kind of density to the thing.
Yeah, and even aliens. I love aliens, but the alien is much less cool in that movie, and they say that it's because they're hive workers or something. They don't say it in the movie, but like the expanded universe.
Right, drones versus
Drones.
predators. Yeah.
But that first alien with the slick dome on its head, and it kind of has the skull under it, like um, in the making of photographs, you can see way more clearly that it's a human skull under that dome. But you can kind of vaguely see it in this, and it's got the smooth head. They never perfected that. That was perfect in the first movie, and any change to it, any alteration, I think was because it never was Giger again. Or it was Giger in Alien 3, right?
Yeah, he contributed designs, but I don't think he actually built them.
No, yeah, I think his involvement was pretty limited.
Yeah.
But yeah, any changes uh did not make that any cooler.
Yeah. And I think the difference of Alien too is that you have this phenomenal physical performer. I'm going to get his name wrong, Bojan Bozelli,
Yeah, yeah.
who dances the role. Like he's folding his body and contorting himself in ways that we see tiny flashes, tiny pieces of, except for that shot in the vents when it gets Dallas, when it's just like it's really just going surprise, and it's an
Yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
moment because it's if you watch it without the sound, it's funny.
Yeah. It's so scary with sound.
And as the punchline to that entire scene, that one moment where the film just stands there and shakes you by the throat.
And it doesn't make any sense logically, but when it sticks its arms out and it cuts to like digital noise and then goes back to the survivors, um, it doesn't make any sense that that happens because he's not filming anything. But it's so spooky the way that it does that in a very modern feeling way. If a lot of that movie you look at and it feels like it could have been shot today, especially the ending, uh, Ripley's whole chase through the ship when it's the super tights of her and it's so crisp and beautiful. But yeah, that shot in the vent specifically feels so strange in such a cool modern way to me
Yeah.
that it cuts away to that digital noise and the digital sound, like the squeaking, squealing. I love that moment so much.
Yeah. Have you ever been able to see Alien in the theater? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, because it came out for Romulus, and that was the first time I had ever seen it, and it's so different. It's so like I said, it's such a beautiful movie, and you realize watching it now on the widescreen TVs, but really on a big screen, it's just majestic.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw it in 95, in 70, in the Uptown One in Toronto of blessed memory. They had a midnight film festival, and a handful of them, The Thing was there, and Alien, and they were 70 millimeter prints. And Alien was, I'd seen it, I must have seen it a dozen times by then, but it was so beautiful and so just easy to sink into and
Yeah,
just experience it. And the thing that I really took away from that screening was watching it play the audience, was
yeah,
watching it just pummel people who had not seen it enough times to know where the beats were and how it was going to work. And I fell into it myself in the second act and just that amorphousness of it. But just listening to people, and this happened with Jaws too, like people wanted to make fun of the movie because it was a midnight screening and it's cool to make fun of things at midnight, and it
yeah,
just beat them down. It would
yeah,
not let them laugh at it, and it was so exhilarating
yeah.
to be in the grip of this thing at scale, like the way it was supposed to be seen.
Yeah, there was like a group of Gen Z kids at this screening, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare." And they got totally swept up in it. There was no laughing. Like watching Alien, I don't know what there would be to laugh at because it ages so well. There's nothing really silly. It was one of the first movies that broke that B movie mold where the thing is like that too, where um, the movies kind of stopped aging poorly. The effects became so good and the directors became so good that they don't age the way that movies from the 50s do,
Right.
where the effects got good enough that we haven't really now moved past that, the physical effects wise. Um, so there's not really anything to laugh at in Alien. It has aged so nicely, and the amount of quality you can pull out of 35 millimeter film it's just insane. Those that tight shot of Ripley when she comes up the ladder could have been shot on the highest like 8K can. It's so crisp. All of the beads of sweat on her head and her fingers. It's amazing to look at.
No, it's a gorgeous film. And I mean, again, Ridley Scott was a commercial director. He'd made one feature. He still had to prove himself, I think.
Yeah.
And that's the reason this is successful in a way that maybe subsequent films, like even stuff like Thelma and Louise and Blade Runner, I love them, but they are very much the work of someone who knows what he's doing and is kind of throwing his weight around a little bit. It's like, no, I made Alien. I know how to make a movie in space. I know how to make a movie with robots. Alien is the one where all the pieces work properly, and also the pressure from outside is just enough that it turns it into a diamond. I think he's working against all the studio constraints and all these budget limitations and space limitations. They only had 3 corridors, right? They couldn't build the entire Nostromo. Yeah. But ingenuity comes out and fixes the problems and makes it look unique and remarkable.
And all these, so much of it visually was his, like the storyboards that you look at, and he was copying Mobius a lot in the visuals. They look like Mobius drawings but the interiors are his. He then got, Ron Cobb to come on and do a lot of the turning it into what looks like a functional interior of a ship. Mm-hmm. All of these people, ultimately Ridley Scott was the buck ended with him, but like Ron Cobb and Giger and Walter Hill and Geiler and Dan O'Bannon, all of these different things, and Mobius too. Mobius designed the spacesuits for them with like the samurai element in it. Yeah. And it's the same story with so many of these movies. The movies that turn out perfectly is like all of these people who are so talented at the right place at the right time, brought together by something weird like Dune collapsing. And they segued into this, and everything just came together at the right time. There was enough restraint. Ridley Scott had enough, like there was not too much money and not too little money. He was able to make it beautifully, but not get carried away in the way that Ridley Scott does get carried away in later stuff, and especially in his Prometheus movies. But I love these stories where it's just like, it's magic. It's all of these different elements that happen to come together. Star Wars was the same way. All of these people that they just gel in a way that so few movies do. And it resulted in, it's a piece of magic.
Yeah. And I cannot forget Derek Van Lint, who shot it. It was his first feature job. He was a commercial director. He'd made some shorts, but this is his first movie. He only shot 3 films, one of which he directed, but the only other two, in 2000 called The Spreading Ground, the only other films he made as a cinematographer were Alien and Dragon Slayer, and they are 2 of the most distinctive and weirdly beautiful pieces of work from that era. Both of which integrate elaborate visual effects in ways that maybe other filmmakers wouldn't have. Like, I think his approach, maybe not influence, but his approach is the other real strength of the film, is that no one had tried this before. And so he made it work.
The stuff on the cockpit of the Nostromo is like when the fire starts in it and it's all shot handheld. Mm-hmm. That feels so unlike anything of that era. That feels straight out of today. And just speaking of the cockpit of the ship itself, like in Ron Cobb's drawings, that is like vast with big windows that look out into outer space, these vistas, and they couldn't afford it. They didn't have access to the Dijkstraflex, the motion control camera.
Right.
So they couldn't do that much space comping stuff. So the interior of that cockpit is so frightening because you can't see outside. It's all just buttons and levers, and it's tiny. You can't see anything. It's dark. It's full of smoke because Ridley Scott loved to fill stuff with smoke to create the atmosphere. So the limits on so many of these movies, the limits create what I think is a way better end result.
Yeah, and that lets me pivot to your own work with Astronaut Six and the films that you're making now, where the limits are the point. Making movies the way they used to, right? With prosthetics and practical effects, and I mean, this one you actually have your own head with the eyes popping out. There's all
Yeah,
sorts of incidental stuff that is so pleasurable to me. Anyway, it's like as an old watching the movies that play with the tech that I remember and are as fond of it. Like Psycho Gorman was the same way. Even Father's Day and The Editor sort of play with the language of old genre cinema or older genre cinema. And Frankie Freako is, I mean, you flat out call the guy Mr. Buchler. This is like
yeah,
this is that movie.
yeah. Well, Steve loves Ghoulies, specifically Ghoulies Go to College, which whenever he tells people, they're like, "Are you kidding me?" That I still haven't seen Ghoulies Go to College, but people cannot believe how much he loves that movie.
I must have seen it. I
Yeah,
reviewed all of them back in the day.
the Ghoulies movies.
Yeah, whenever
Yeah.
they, I mean, I wrote for the Stars home video magazine, so basically we would
Okay.
just get everything on tape. So
Right.
you name it, if it came from Full Moon, they would give it to me, and then all the other stuff.
Well, Full Moon is Steve's like that is his company, his Full Moon. So to hear you say that, he's going to be right into it because the Full Moon's fingerprints are all over Frankie Freako, and that it makes making these movies much harder and a much longer process, but it's just night and day to watch something digital versus something where people are interacting with actual animate objects on screen. And the for me, it was really hard in Frankie Freako because it's just me the whole movie.
Yeah.
I have like three scenes with human beings, and then the rest of the movie is me and these puppets. And I didn't even get to work with the articulated puppets. Those are all uh, insert shots that were done after I was gone because they're just too intricate to work with for me to have been on screen with. So I was working with just like dummies that were propped up against something with no facial expression at all. There's no voice actors. It's just the puppeteers or somebody off screen reading the script with no inflection, no intonation at all. So by the end of the shoot, I felt like I was going crazy because every day was just me alone with these toys, and I have to like cry talking to them and like have emotional moments talking to these ridiculous little puppets. But I think it adds once you see it all put together, it's so silly and so uh, stupid in a great way. I think it really came together into something really funny.
Yeah, I mean, the movie kind of even sets the stage for movie Connor as an overgrown man child. Like
Yeah,
his idea of intimacy is just holding one hand to another person's hand, and there's the sense that he used to have more of an inner
wild
life.
side.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, Steve, yeah, if there's anything that he's in touch with most, it's inner child. So like uh man babies, there's lots of man babies in his movies,
hmm
and just like the joy of being of having a young mind. And that definitely comes through in just the plots and the effects of like PG obviously and this the silliness and kind of just the joy of movies, the simple joy of what we loved about these things when we were kids. That is like his big talent to me.
yeah, and making the whole movie naive instead of one character. Right, like
Yes,
I think that's the strength of Frankie Freako specifically, where we're in some kind of kid's idea of what grown up life looks like.
that's what I love about. I was going to pick Pee Wee's Big Adventure for one of my
hmm
movies, and I love that in Pee Wee's Big Adventure is that you kind of think going into that movie that he's going to be a fish out of water, that people are going to be like, "Oh, Pee Wee's weird," but people love Pee Wee. Everybody loves him. His neighbors love him. He's just another person in the city in that movie, and um, I love those movies that don't point out this character's odd. Um, they just are. They're just a person, another person that's there. And I think that there's elements of Pee-wee also in Steve's stuff, like the joy, the joyfulness, and the silliness and the childishness.
Yeah. We are about to screen The Void. I'm going to throw in a free plug for that one. And in See the North at the Lightbox, a free screening of The Void for our Halloween special,
Oh, nice.
celebration of Canadian cinema. And it's so unlike his other work.
Yes.
I rewatched it, and it's like, I love it because it's the one that leans into the John Carpenter apocalypse everything sensibility, but it takes itself seriously. It tells its own story. It doesn't have the I guess the exit valve or the exit hatch. I don't know, the escape hatch of PG or Frankie Freako, where none of this is serious. You don't have to take it seriously. It's all in fun. But there's like a real fascination of mine in watching him be serious.
Yeah.
And then just put it all away for the movies that he truly loves to make, like these goofy puppet films.
Yeah. Well, he loves, like all of us in that group, is he loves those serious movies too, the Assault on Precinct 13s and The Thing. And I think working with Jeremy Gillespie on that one as his co-director, it was easier for him to go into the straight up Lovecraftian, full on genuine horror. I think his favorite place to work is the more pitched Deathstalker PG, Frankie Freako. But yeah, I think the Void is pretty awesome for just for the sake of, like, it's such a deviation for him out of what seems like his comfort zone.
Yeah. And I think playing with the practical side too on that one is even more fun because
the effects are great.
Yeah, and there are no limits the way there are with Frankie Freako, where it's still kind of, it has to be innuendo based rather than, there's no explicit violence. There's that absolutely wonderful first moment where he beats up Shabadoo and briefly feels remorse.
Yeah.
Point. That's right. And
where I beat him almost to death.
Yeah, and the Void can just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all flirting in the more kid-friendly stuff. It's all flirting with the real violence and fear that you can tell that he really likes and kind of wants to drift into, but stops himself short.
Yeah, and I do love the fact that is it exactly. Like, he is making these movies for kids, in a very strange way, that like kids who were like me in the 80s who maybe don't fully understand the ramifications of the larger worlds that you're building here, but Frankie Freako and PG can both show up on cable someday and really warp somebody.
Yeah. Well, this is the first thing that I've worked on, really. I've got a 7-year-old son and 6-year-old, almost 7. But it's the first thing where I'm like, this is something that he can really watch and enjoy. And he did. He loved it. He thought it was ridiculous and fun. The characters are fun and funny. Even PG is a little too intense for a kid, but this is like full on. He had a blast with it. And it was fun to finally have something that I could finally show him of mine.
Oh, that's lovely. When do you think he'll be ready for Alien?
I want to show it to him now. My wife's not going to let me show it to him now, but I would. I saw it when I was probably 9 or 10. I think I would show it to him like when he's 8, probably. Yeah. So, like, I don't know. There's not that. Alien didn't scare me as a kid. It made me feel sick and weird and grossed out. But I didn't ever feel like if I turn a corner in a dark alley, I'm going to see a xenomorph. Like, it didn't scare me. But it just is so unpleasant that it unnerved me. And I think that is okay. Like, and kids they can't articulate it, but they can feel it. And that's what it was for me. And I don't know, I want to show it to him now, but I'll wait a year, I think.
He'll stumble onto it on Disney Plus and it'll happen on its own.
Well, that's the thing, is it doesn't really happen anymore because I guess with streaming, I suppose you could just drift over into the more adult stuff, but it used to be that you weren't being observed when you were on TV, so you could maybe Alien would be on TV and you would go to it and you could secretly watch it and it would change your life. That has sadly disappeared.
I think something really key to artistic development and like the understanding of your own personal aesthetic and the thing that you love versus the thing that you're just not that interested in, that's gone away in a way that no one saw coming in the last 10 years, right? Like, because YouTube is steering people and algorithms on Netflix will show you like a different tile based on what it thinks you're looking for a given movie. And we just don't get the only thing I can think of now is the Criterion channel that has launched a 24/7 streamer. And there it is possible to stumble onto something.
Yeah. And Night Flight does that too. Night Flight is... yeah. Did you ever watch Night Flight?
No, I don't know what it is.
It was like I don't know if it was a channel or a show, but it was basically like a late night 80s. It was kind of MTV. They would do stuff about spotlights on musicians and filmmakers, and they would show cult and horror movies. It's really great. And they have two channels. They have a all day, all night, 24-hour cult and horror channel, and they've got Night Flight as just an all day, all night streaming. And they'll show they have all of their old vintage 80s. It's like episodes, like a MTV programming. So they have all of those, so you can sit there and watch those. It's great to watch like at night if you're just relaxing, to watch old episodes of Night Flight. So I recommend that as a streaming channel. That and Criterion are my two favorites.
They're just possible, like they just allow for discovery, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. The thing is, like, I always feel like I have to stop myself because I feel like I'm becoming an old, out of touch person when I say, like, no, they're not going to be able to discover anything anymore because they're not doing it the way that we did it. And maybe in like 20 years, they'll be like, we discovered this great way. We discovered these movies on our own in a different way than you guys did. But my instinct always, and I'm feeling it right now, is like, you're not discovering these things. You're watching stupid stuff. You're watching YouTube videos of streamers playing video games, and it's idiotic. But who knows? Like, maybe we're just out of touch. I don't know.
No, the children are wrong.
Yeah, I'm not wrong. The children are wrong.
My thanks to Conor Sweeney, who you can see partying with some very freaky friends in Frankie Freako, opening across Canada this Friday, October 4th. In Toronto, it's playing at the Review Cinema, and the cast and crew is doing a Q&A on opening night. That'll be fun. Thanks also to Ingrid Hamilton. She knows what she did. Conor's Instagram account is private, but you can keep track of Frankie Freako by following shout_studios or Raven Banner Ent, E-N-T, and you can find Alien in excellent 4K and Blu-ray editions from Walt Disney Home Entertainment and streaming on Disney Plus and Crave in Canada and Hulu in the US. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. And come see The Void at TIFF Lightbox in our free See the North series on Tuesday, October 15th. Tickets are still available at tiff.net. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.